Clerk will call the roll.
Glenn Whitley, County Judge.
Here.
Roy Charles Brooks, Commissioner Precinct 1.
Present.
Andy H. Wynn, Commissioner Precinct 2.
Here.
Gary Fickus, Commissioner Precinct 3.
Here.
J.D. Johnson, Commissioner Precinct 4.
Here.
Constitutes a quorum.
Thank you. Our invitation today will be delivered by Pastor Guy Cantella from the DFW New Beginnings Church in Bedford. Thank you for coming out today. After the invitation, please remain standing for our pledge.
Thank you, Lord God and Father, for being good and holy and perfect, all that you are, and we thank you for our lives and the breath in our lungs. We're mindful and grateful of your presence and blessing, residing and presiding in this place, and thank you for the right to pray freely to you in this great nation. Bless these honorable folks here and at this governmental level, and that they're on the front lines, protecting our rights, our freedoms, and stewarding this county. Lord, I thank you that you would empower them to judge with this policy with wisdom and with righteousness. And Father, I ask you to strengthen them, and that you would let them know that they're of irreplaceable value to the very thrust of this nation at this level. And I thank you for this. I bless the proceedings today, that you would do that, Lord, and their loved ones at home. And God bless America. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the Court, we have several announcements and then comments about the agenda today. First of all, under the County Administrator section, item 8A4, we're going to hold that particular item. Under the Budget and Risk Management section, item 8C2, this is the FY17 Appropriation Adjustments. There's a revised court communication in your folder this morning. Then also, members would like to talk a little bit about how the agenda is going to roll out this morning. As you notice, we have a work session today also, and we're going to go into a work session after we come out of closed. The work session will be held here in the Commissioner's courtroom. Rather than 504, it'll be held here. The work session should last about an hour and a half. So we will try to get started, looking at the agenda and everything, probably around 11:30 into the work session. So with that, those are the agenda announcements.
Thank you. Board members, you have before you the regular minutes of the minutes of the regular meeting of August the 1st.
Move approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. We have a couple of congratulatory resolutions. The first is for Meals on Wheels, and I believe we have some representatives. Carla, there you are. Y'all come on forward. This is Carla Justice, President, and I'm not having a good time talking this morning. President and CEO Barbara, is it Lundgren? Vice President, and then Keith Harrison, Manager of Strategic Marketing and Communications. So I'll read this into the record, and then I'll come down and we'll present the plaque. Whereas Meals on Wheels of Tarrant County seeks to promote the dignity and independence of older adults, persons with disabilities, and other homebound persons by delivering nutritious meals and providing a coordinated needed services, and whereas caring people of the community came together 44 years ago to locally solve the problem of senior hunger in Tarrant County, feeding 25 people the first week, and now serving approximately 1 million meals per year to the frail citizens in our community. And whereas over 5,000 volunteers freely give of their time to deliver nutritious meals, daily safety checks, and warm, caring smiles, and whereas Meals meet or exceed the nutritional guidelines established by the United States government, improving the physical and mental health of the clients they serve, and whereas keeping clients in their own homes not only provides them with dignity and independence, but also saves Tarrant County taxpayers millions of dollars each year in Medicaid and Medicare spending by keeping elderly clients out of taxpayer-funded nursing and care facilities. Now therefore be it resolved that we, the Commissioners Court of Tarrant County, do hereby congratulate Meals on Wheels of Tarrant County on the milestone of serving its 20 millionth meal this Friday, August the 11th, 2017. In witness whereof, we have herein to set our hands and cause the seal of Tarrant County to be affixed this 8th day of August, 2017, and I'll move its approval.
Second.
Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. I know that our employees, we have many employees who deliver Meals on Wheels each week. And we certainly appreciate everything you and your organization does. And I know we got a camera behind us here. You may want to move around. You want to move around to in front of us now? And then we'll let the dueling cameras out there get a picture here. Okay, now if you'll move back a little bit, we'll get a. I'm boss.
There you go.
Now come forward for your three.
Thank you so much, Judge Whitley and Commissioners. Meals on Wheels is very honored to receive this. This is a big milestone, obviously, but we couldn't have done it without every one of you and everybody else in Tarrant County. The volunteers, the donors, and those that cared immensely. We appreciate your financial support and your emotional support, obviously your volunteerism. Thank you so very much.
Wait a minute, before you leave, I have another paper resolution here. I don't know why I have both, but I do.
Okay.
So, let me just give this to you, and if there's somebody else you want to give this to, feel free to do that too. We got two covered. Thank you. I hope both of your meals on wheels, otherwise I may have given away your flag. Commissioner Fickus.
Yes, we have a congratulatory resolution that will be presented later in the week. This is for Grapevine Flag Plaza dedication. And whereas on August the 11th, 2017, the Grapevine Chamber Leadership Class will honor the city of Grapevine with a Flag Plaza dedication celebrating their 25 years in developing the city's leaders. And whereas this dedication will serve as a memorial to the legendary families who have made Grapevine what it is today. And whereas Grapevine is the oldest settlement in Tarrant County, originating under the Lone Star flag of the Republic of Texas in 1884, a year before Texas was annexed by the United States of America. And whereas Grapevine's Main Street is listed in the National Registry of Historic Places, as is the Cotton Belt Railroad Historic District, where the restored 1901 Cotton Belt Depot and the 1888 Section Foreman's House anchor the Grapevine Heritage Center complex. And whereas the community became known as Grapevine because of the wild Mustang grapes that grow on the trees and shrubs. And whereas in the first half of the 19th century, Grapevine was an agriculturally based community that grew at a moderate pace. Now, therefore, be it resolved that we, the Commissioners Court of Tarrant County, do hereby congratulate the Grapevine Chamber Leadership Class as they dedicate Flag Plaza to the city of Grapevine. Herein witness, therefore, whereof we have hereunto set our hand and cause the seal of Tarrant County to be affixed this 9th day of August. 2017.
You're sounding more like Mayor Tate every day.
No, I can't do that. There's nobody can do this.
It'd be about
He would
15
have thrown
minutes
down
longer.
the
It would-
Grapevine
yeah.
Prairie and talked about, the
The Great Prairie.
the
Grand
Indians,
Prairie.
the Indians that came and visited, and the treaty that they signed, that 3 other cities say they signed. Anyway, I move approval.
Several seconds, I think. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
You now have before you the consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Manius, do you want to talk to us about Fredericksburg and maybe the history that goes on with Fredericksburg
Or Kerrville.
or Kerrville?
Talk about great.
No, not at all.
Don't speak Kerrville around him.
We got our history lesson for this morning.
By the way, Commissioner, we need to talk about that resolution after a while. Okay, members of the court, we have 3 items to bring to you this morning. The first one concerns the Tarrant County government's proposed effective and rollback tax rates for tax year 2017. We're requesting that the Commissioners' Court take the following actions. 1, receive and file the proposed effective and rollback tax rate information for Tarrant County government. And if the proposed tax rate exceeds the effective or rollback tax rates, whichever is lower, call a public hearing for August 22nd, 2017 and September 5th, 2017 at 10 a.m. in the Commissioner's courtroom.
Move to receive and file.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Members of the court, if we can now go to item number 2, we're requesting that the Commissioners' Court take the following actions. Receive and file the proposed effective and rollback tax rates for Tarrant County Hospital District. Propose a tax rate of .227897 for tax year 2017 and take a record vote. And if the proposed tax rate exceeds the effective and rollback tax rate, call a public hearing for August 22nd, 2017 and September 5th, 2017 at 10 a.m. in the Commissioner's courtroom.
Move to receive and file. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Just for clarification on all the motions, that also includes the fact that we are calling the public hearings for both the first one and the second item, okay? Okay, thank you. Members of the court, we can go to action item number 3. We're requesting that the Commissioners' Court approve a order which authorizes the use of $5 million to general funds for payment of tax refunds owed to Tarrant County taxpayers, and requests that the county auditor be authorized to execute the transfer of funds without it first appearing on the claims register.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Tidwell.
We have one item that we're asking the court to consider this morning, and that is to receive and file the quarterly investment report for the period ended June 30th, 2017.
Move to receive and file. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote.
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Snyder.
Risk Management Board is recommending the approval of the claim as listed on your court communication.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Quinn.
Move to
Morning.
receive and file the personnel agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the personnel agenda. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Good morning. We have two additional items for the court. The second item, we're asking the court to approve an out-of-class pay extension for information technology. Mr. Iafor is requesting an out-of-class pay extension effective August the 15th, the details of which are outlined in your communique. We're estimating the impact to the general fund to be approximately $1,400, including fringe benefits.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Our third and final item, we're asking the court to approve changes to the table of organization for the Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Wayburn is requesting the addition of 6 new positions. Your communique also explains that there are 16 associated position and organizational changes, primarily different reporting within the department as a result of the creation of these positions. We're asking that these changes be approved effective August 12th. We are looking at 3 different funds being impacted. The general fund for $180,531, including fringes. The commissary fund, $216,369, including fringes. And finally, the forfeiture fund for $40,156, including fringes.
Are these the 6 positions on the to be continued list?
No.
No.
They're not.
Move approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second. So these are ones that we talked, I think we talked a little bit about those last week.
Correct.
So we're making those
Effective.
effective now
That's the request.
instead of waiting for the first of the year.
That's the request.
Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Benny?
Morning, Your Honor, and members of the court. Public Health requesting one item for your consideration this morning. It's a approval of the agreement for expanded access for investigational new drug program between Sanofi Pasteur and Tarrant County. This is for the yellow fever vaccine. The current vaccine is going out of production, and Sanofi's got a special FDA approval to bring the European version of the vaccine that's used overseas in many other continents and has been in use for several years. So we're requesting permission to be one of those expanded access sites.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bates?
Good morning. We have 4 items for your consideration this morning. Our first item is a bid award recommendation for bid 2017-079, signing a contract for janitorial services. Recommendation would be toward a per unit price basis, awarding group 1, 2, and 3 to the primary, secondary, and alternate vendors as shown in your court communique.
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Item number 2 is another bid award recommendation for bid 2017-123. This is a bid for the lower roof re-roofing for the 1895 courthouse. Recommendation would be toward the low bidder, Jeff Eubank Roofing Company, amount of $236,230. If approved, we're seeking contract approval, acceptance of the payment, and performance bond.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Item number 3 is a partial award recommendation for RFP 2017-127. This is a partial award for pharmacy services for prescription drug dispensing for the Public Health Department. Recommendation would be to award per the terms of the contract, awarding to Reset Pharmacy.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Our last item is a bid award recommendation for bid 2017-151, signing a contract for mosquito control pesticides and products. Recommendation would be to award on a per enterprise basis, awarding certain items to Target Specialty Products, Air Mosquito Control Products, and Adapco.
Move for approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Mr. Skinner.
Morning.
Good morning.
We have 2 items for your consideration this morning. The first item, we are requesting the court's approval of an advance funding agreement with the Texas Department of Transportation related to a bridge replacement project at Liberty School Road over Briar Creek.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Our second item, we are requesting the court's approval of an advanced funding agreement with the Texas Department of Transportation related to a bridge replacement project at Grants Lane over Gilmore Creek.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any appointments today? One of the appointments that I would like to, our NTTA appointment, Chairman Barr is up for reappointment, and so I'd like to move that we reappoint him to the.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Any additional appointments? And with that, we will move to the claims, including the addendum.
Move approval of the claims, including the addendum.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the claims, including the addendum. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Briefing items, Mr. Mayes.
Thank you, Your Honor. We have two items for the court this morning. The first involves the legislative issues. I just want to make a comment. There was a full-page article this morning on the Star Telegram as related to all the different elements or the 20-some-odd items that were placed on the call. And when I read that, it really pretty well explains where we are today on each and every one of those. So if you have a moment sometime, maybe today, or just have your staff pick up the paper, that gives you a pretty good understanding of where we are. Obviously, we're getting very close to the sine die aspect of this special session, which I believe is the 16th.
Yes.
And so that will be next week, next Wednesday. So with that, things are not moving very much. HB 1880 or 8184 is going to be scheduled for a House action on the floor next Wednesday, the 9th. Revenue capture still in calendars. All other items seem to be moving at a very slow pace in the House.
I don't think we've had any movement at all, again, on the ability to place a dollar amount of homestead exemption versus a percentage.
We have not seen any movement on that, Your Honor.
So I would encourage everyone to consider talking with their representatives about that, or with their senators, because that's something that would allow us to give that dollar amount versus, and that would truly be some good property tax reduction.
And that would be really good for the taxpayers. And Your Honor, what we need to make sure, if it doesn't get any good movement on this special session, as we move forward into other special sessions in the next regular session, we might want to seriously consider trying to push that as one of our legislative priorities. With that, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions the court may have. If not, then we'll move to item B, which is the FY18 budget, and we're not going to do anything.
Okay, good.
Just, well, I know she's awake now. Obviously, we had our budget meetings yesterday, the budget department, and we're going to be helping also. We're working through some of the action items that you took. We're working with the auditor's office also on revenue issues. And once those are completed, we'll bring those back to you in a court session on the briefing.
Okay.
So with that, Your Honor, that's all we have.
So we will recess our open meeting, proceed to closed session, discuss items exempted under section 551, .071, 072, 074, 076, and 087 of the Texas Government Code.
Mr. Wilder, the more comfortable seats are around the wall.
You're going to learn a lot of district clerk stuff in this meeting. Do what? Eat? We just got through eating. I guess I don't know, Tom.
Yeah. I'll find them myself.
No, lunch is over. Well, you got part of your chickens together.
What's that?
Got part of your flock together.
Well, I had 4. And one of them escaped. Got runs. And I told Commissioner Frickes we were about to start.
Is that? 3. I didn't realize I took that vote.
I didn't either.
No, I'm gonna fall figures. I'm gonna sleep through half of this one.
Okay. You want me to get you a blanket? Just give me the signal. In return from our closed session, we'll now continue our business with that.
Thank you, Honor. Members of the court, we're going into work session at this time. You're going to be hearing presentations from 3 different groups. Let me kind of lay the groundwork on this. As you know, the Blue Ribbon Committee and our efforts with healthcare in Tarrant County are going on for about a year now. And the Commissioners Court has engaged 2 different consulting groups to help us. One is Health Management Associates, and the other one is Cumming. And Cumming has also contracted with Percival to provide some additional resources in us trying to meet our goals. Blue Ribbon Committee has been meeting for some time now, and they are in the process of finalizing their recommendations and beginning to draft the final report that we'll be providing to the Commissioners Court. However, what we were going to do and what we want to do today is ask the consultants to come to the Commissioners Court and talk about the recommendations that they made to the Blue Ribbon Committee. And so we have 3 different presentations this afternoon. We're going to start with Health Management Associates. We're going to move to Percival, and then finally Cumming. And so you'll have at least 3, possibly 4 different presenters that you'll hear from today. So with that, we're going to ask that Health Management Associates come forward. Lori Weisselberg is the main consultant. There's also Dr. Greg. Okay. Dr. Greg. Sean. You know, I have to admit, I knew how to pronounce that, but we were playing with your name and tried to pronounce it as Texans would. And sorry about that. But Lori, if you'll go ahead and
Sure.
And Lori, before, may I interrupt you for one quick minute? I want to take a quick minute to recognize the presence of some members of the Precinct 2 Healthcare Advisory Committee. And as volunteers, you are very dedicated, and it's a great surprise for me this afternoon to see your presence here. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to introduce to the court as well as the audience, Dr. and Pastor Michael Evans of Bethlehem Church in Mansfield, and also Tarrant County College trustee, and Mr. Tran Trong from Arlington, Miss Susan Phillips with the East Arlington Renewal, Mr. Everybody know who Dennis Kuhlman is, the JPS watchdog, right? And Dr. Joseph Lukaska. Thank you so much for your service to Precinct 2 and certainly Tarrant County and JPS. Thank you.
Thank you all for your service.
Okay, so I'm Lori Weisselberg from Health Management Associates, and I've been around, as Mr. Mania said, for a year. So in August of 2016, you folks commissioned long-range planning and analysis for the JPS Health Network. And the charter established for our work was to work with JPS Health Network and the county to look into the future and anticipate changes in population, demographics, in growth, looking long-term, looking at technology and how we provide healthcare services. And with that information, the Tarrant County Commissioners Court would be able to make more informed decisions about ways to improve the health status of county residents. So HMA's approach, real briefly, we had a team of clinical, finance, operations, quality, and public health experts. We conducted research on national trends in healthcare and how they affect Tarrant County. We analyzed a variety of data from JPS and other health systems in the county and other public hospitals in Texas. We observed JPS operations. We assessed the health status of the overall county population and looked at health disparities within that within the population. We assessed the demographics and county population projections, looking over 10 and 20 years. We engaged stakeholders in individual interviews. We conducted about 130 interviews from everywhere from CEOs of large hospital systems to the heads of small free clinics and everyone in between. We conducted 4 community forums in each of the precincts, and many of you were there, so thank you for that, and 2 focus groups of community advocates and JPS patients as well. We developed findings from all of that information and provided recommendations for action in a very large document that was submitted. And what we'd like to do today is just hit the highlights. So our overall impressions, and I have to say that we do a lot of work in public hospital systems across the country. Our overall impressions were very, very positive. The JPS Health Network is a really strong academic public hospital system. It's a critical provider of the health services to the underserved of Tarrant County, and not just the underserved. It plays a greater role in the county for folks of all socioeconomic statuses, looking at trauma, behavioral health, and other service lines that draw other populations as well. JPS is recognized and valued by residents, by community leaders, and by healthcare, public health, and social service providers in the county. There's a theme in our interviews that after Mr. Early took the helm, that things really changed and are on an extremely positive trajectory. There are several opportunities to improve the health and healthcare access of the county through countywide planning and implementation with key partners, and we'll be discussing some of those partnerships a little bit later in the presentation. But we know that facilities is a huge issue, and that clearly JPS is at a crossroads in the development of facilities to meet the county's rapidly growing healthcare needs. Okay, so just to touch briefly on demographics, and you probably know this, the county's population is expected to grow over 46% in the next 20 years, so from 2 million in 2017 to almost 3 million in 2037. The Medicare, for older folks, eligible population is expected to increase sharply, about 41%, in just 6 years between 2015 and 2021. The population will grow increasingly diverse in the county. The highest growth rates are in the Hispanic, Asian, and Black populations. So the rapid growth, aging, and diversity of the Tarrant County population in the coming decades and changes in healthcare delivery systems and financing, the financing environment really requires JPS and others to focus on several priorities simultaneously. And these are the priorities as we see them, in addition to facilities. So one is workforce, to invest in health professions training and planning to ensure adequate workforce. You can have the facilities, but you need the workforce. The second, again, is capacity, and that deals directly with facilities. So plan for needed JPS system capacity, both in ambulatory, which is outpatient, and hospital care in light of the population growth. The third is to optimize management of the low-income patient population. So JPS needs to be positioned for new and emerging payment systems or value-based payment systems and consider integrated delivery system with partners to better manage low-income uninsured. And we'll talk about that in a bit. And the fourth is to really invest in prevention, investing in countywide prevention and also addressing social determinants of health to decrease overall healthcare costs. And we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so Dr. Vaishon and I are going to go through each one of these four priorities and talk about those a little bit in more detail. And feel free to ask questions at any point that you may have them. So the first one was workforce and health professions education. So a key priority for the county is to ensure an adequate future healthcare workforce. Population growth will further exacerbate existing primary care and specialty shortages. So right now there are some significant shortages both in primary care and specialty workforce. We know that JPS is a vital contributor to the training of Tarrant County's future healthcare professionals. And to be sustainable, public hospitals really must invest in their teaching programs. JPS has one of the largest family practice residency programs. It's nationally recognized. There are multiple other graduate medical education programs and a really wide array of other health professions training at JPS as well. HMA recommends expanding and strengthening JPS's health professions training program. So this work has begun. JPS should continue to work collaboratively with local education partners to lead the creation of a blueprint for graduate medical education expansion. One area that is missing right now is internal medicine. That's an important focus, particularly as you have this new medical school coming into starting up shortly. It's perfect timing to expand residency programs to fill the gaps in both internal medicine and some medical subspecialties, and other health professions training and recruitment strategies. So in terms of recruitment, most physicians practice within 50 miles of where they did their residency program. So this is really, really important, not just to have that capacity, but to ensure strong recruitment strategies as well. Okay, I think Greg is up next. I'll be back.
Yeah, I'm going to take over for a little bit here. Thank you for this opportunity to report back to you. I'm a physician, internal medicine. I do still practice medicine in a safety net system, FQHC on the south side of Chicago, and have been with HMA for about 8 years, doing a variety of work, but as Lori said, in many different safety net systems throughout the country, helping to plan for and implement pieces of the infrastructure for integrated delivery systems. I'm going to go over 4 pieces of the delivery system: primary care, specialty, acute care hospital, and the behavioral psychiatric component. So let us go first to that, the primary care. The overall in the county, there is a shortage of primary care. And that's evidenced in a number of ways. One is that there's federal designation, that there's actual shortage areas. The JPS primary care providers have big, full panels and some challenges on the access for those patients to get into those panels. And when new patients are trying to get in, that's very difficult because those panels are so full. So these are some of the pieces of evidence of primary care shortage. In addition, you have low acuity emergency room visits, so people coming to the emergency room that could have been taken care of through primary care, and even going into the hospital with ambulatory sensitive conditions, things that could have been taken care of through primary care. So a critical piece, expanding primary care for that low-income population so that both for JPS and for other hospitals in the county, there's more appropriate use of those facilities. So let's look at some numbers, which is really about the current capacity and the needs. So we'll look at the needs first, which is right now about 378 FTEs, 378 primary care doctors or advanced practitioners, nurses, or PAs would be needed to kind of meet the needs of that under 250% FPL. What JPS has now is kind of their capacity and their infrastructure is 98 FTEs. So if that were all directed towards that population, you'd be talking about 26%. That's about what could be covered with the capacity that is currently available within JPS. It's such a critical component of that integrated delivery system and of prevention and of kind of ensuring best utilization downstream that we recommend that the 26%, that kind of capability, the capacity of the system, be brought up to 50% over 20 years. And to have that integrated with behavioral health and dental care, which are also so important for the overall health of these individuals that will be served by primary care. To do that, to get up to that 50% in 20 years, requires quite an investment. That basically in 5 years, you would need 37 new FTEs of primary care to put you on that path of getting to get to 50%, so to put you on that path over that timeline. And that would require about 4 new health centers.
So let me stop you for just one second.
Absolutely.
You said that we're currently at about 26% and that we need to move from 26% up to 50.
Yes.
If we've got 98 right now, then to get to the 50, shouldn't we be looking at somewhere around 200?
Yeah, the needs are going to increase over time as well because of the growing population. So the population itself is growing expansively during that time, and some predictions as well as who that population makeup is. There's more older, they require more primary care. So it takes into account all of those factors, and then has the percentage of that growing over time each year from the current 26 to the 50.
We're assuming that the other 50% will be handled and cared for by the other institution.
Yeah, I mean, right now, we see lots of evidence that some of that primary care is not happening at all. That there are people coming into the hospital with ambulatory sensitive conditions that could have been taken care of. They're coming to the emergency room with low acuity. So right now, it's not as if 100% is being covered. This gets you closer, and yes, you would fully expect and want to be in partnership and be encouraging of other systems to take on some of that as well. And some of that could be through federally qualified health centers and kind of having boosting their capability to see more patients, which is particularly low in the county, the amount of capacity within your federally qualified health centers. So that's another component. But this envisions JPS getting to that 50% over the 20 years, but really looking at that first 5 to 10 years and saying 4 health centers, filling those health centers and reassessing. It will be time to reassess at the end of that time period. So we can make the prediction out to there. We know it's quite an investment, but making the suggestion there for 4 new health centers over the 5 to 10 years and then reassessing. So that's primary care. On specialty, it's a similar picture. It's not exactly the same. There are, across the county, significant specialty resources, not far unmatched from the total population now, although the population will be growing, and so that has to be kept in mind quite significantly. So you're starting from a bit of a different place. JPS has about 317 FTEs. The population right now of focus needs 644. That's expected with growth to rise nearly to 1,000 specialists needed.
Is that again to hit the 50% mark?
That will not hit the 50% mark here. So the analysis on, okay, we're hitting 26% of primary care now, we're stretching out to 50. Where will we be on the specialty side? Where are we now and where will we be? Was isolated to more of the ambulatory specialties, so taking out emergency room and neonatology and OB, kind of those inpatient specialties. And there, it's matched. It's about 27% on the specialty side as far as the capacity, the kind of space and people and resources that JPS has available to take care of that population. It's not much greater than the primary care. Would envision that, and we'll go over that later, new buildings, new delivery system efficiencies could raise that, and that's part of these recommendations here. So to essentially look at particular specialty lines, ones that are highest impact, that others in the county are not, don't have a lot of extra resources for or couldn't take on through some partnership and charity care, and say, okay, these are the high impact specialties. These are the ones that others are probably not going to be able to take on or help us out with through partnership. Let's put the resources there and get those particular ones up to a higher percentage, 40 or 50%, and approach it in that direction. So it's part of what will come later in an integrated delivery system for the population of focus. Doing other things to manage that demand on the specialty side. So using APNs and PAs to leverage the physician resources that you have to make them able to see more patients, and to do other things like specialty referral rules, so you're making sure that the right patients get to the right place at the right time, you're using those resources more efficiently, and e-consults, which is really growing in the nation and other safety net systems are using, to use your specialty resources in a way that supports the primary care function more efficiently. So that would be some of the ways to deal with the capacity issues that are at hand.
And if it sounds like we're speaking another language, feel free to just say what's an APN, what's a PA.
Right. So yes, absolutely. Physician assistant and advanced practice nurses are those APNs and PAs. And e-consults are really a way of the primary care physician doing their referral, and instead of the patient traveling and taking up time of staff and the specialist, that consult, oftentimes, 60-70% of the time, can be done by the receiving specialist reading the information, the labs, the communication from the primary care physician, can give an opinion and get the ball rolling on the care that's needed. So it's a more efficient way of doing it. Okay, for the hospital, so this is now we're in acute care. There's definitely significant limitations in the current structure that's causing inefficiencies. It's not meeting market expectations. There are safety issues in terms of semi-private rooms, and it's just not where the industry expectations are for acute care hospital. And the size of it is not sized for the growth that is expected and is undersized even for the current, which I'll go over in the next slide here. So the hospital has 409 beds. That would be, if we take that whole population of 250% under FPL, about enough to do to serve a third of that population fully, if that's what it was being used for. Now, there's a payer mix, which Lori will talk about, that's not fully 250% FPL, nor should it be. But this is a way of looking at how are we sized against the total population. We estimate that 594 beds will be needed in 20 years with that population growth and serving really the same percentage of the 250% FPL that's currently being served. So to kind of keep things in the same place with some assumptions, because this is happening across the United States, some assumptions that the number of beds needed will go down, that there will be both efficiencies on the length of stay, so things that the hospital people do something about, they're able to get those folks out of the hospital sooner, and that some people will not need hospitalization that otherwise would have.
You're saying the 594, not 594 additional beds, but you're saying they would be the new beds, and these 490 that are the old.
It would be 594 is the new total.
New replacement towers, what you're saying.
Exactly. So 409 go away, 594 come in. So
I think one of the things that we need to point out, though, is that with the 409 beds, those are not single room beds.
Right.
Those are double, and sometimes you have 3 beds in a room. And while we may have those beds because of the patient that we have in that room, one patient, that though either one or maybe 2 of the beds may not be usable because we have that particular patient.
And the 490 bed makeup.
The 409.
Yeah. The 409. Yeah. Yep. And we'll see that's true as well on the psychiatric beds, where there's even more pressure on having private versus semi-private rooms. So that 594 is really assuming that Tarrant County as a whole, and JPS in particular, manage down the number of beds needed by 1% per year, or 5% every one of those 5 years. So a real reduction. That would take the county from mid-pack, 50%, which is where you are now, in use of beds for hospital regions, down to the current 10th percentile, so kind of getting to the front of the pack. That would take a lot. Going really more towards what is under control of JPS, the efficiency and the length of stay, and using estimates from Blue Cottage that were previously there, not as aggressive as getting to the top of the pack, but still improving efficiencies, that would have you at 664 beds needed. So we have that range of 594 to 664. The Blue Cottage report did recommend 616 beds, with 120 of those shelled, and shelled meaning that the windows and walls are there, but there's nothing inside. It's empty space. Our recommendation based on that 594 to 664 and the current plans is to build out that full set, the 616 beds, and to do that right from the get-go. And that's because there is already a low percentage served, 34%, and an expectation to work on the payer mix to be able to bring in others as well. All right, so we'll move to the psychiatric hospital and behavioral health, and really, talking about it first as its kind of impacts. That we know there are, significant bad outcomes and costs, in the court, in the criminal justice system, incarceration, huge costs that are burdened there by not having adequate resources on the behavioral health delivery system, substance abuse and psychiatric care. Both here and in many other communities, there is and should be a shift to doing outpatient behavioral health care. So yes, we're going to talk about what the inpatient psychiatric needs are, and they are very low resourced right now. But in order to manage that need, the outpatient behavioral health really needs to be bolstered. So we recommend a continuation and more resources put into the effort that's currently ongoing to integrate behavioral health into the primary care locations. Current ones and the ones that we suggested are built, the 4 over the next 5 to 10 years. And also put together a countywide, the JPS lead a countywide effort for jail diversion, outpatient behavioral health, and strategically placed PECs, which are psychiatric emergency centers, places where law enforcement or others can identify those in crisis and get them into the right level of care right away. So the need for replacement of the hospital itself. So we have that underlying outpatient behavioral health, but the hospital itself is grossly inadequate for current needs, and as it's set up with semi-private rooms and is inefficient as well. So, and to note that different from acute care hospital beds, where all of the beds altogether in the county are about right, that's not the case at all with psychiatric beds. There simply aren't enough across the county. So we do recommend replacement of that hospital. And to talk about numbers, the current numbers are 132 beds. 96 of those are within Trinity Springs, and 36 are contracted. That, just looking at the JPS kind of concentrated population, that would be 37% of need met. But again, there's a shortage across the population as a whole. So looking at that population as a whole and the bed needs for the safety net bed needs for the county as a whole, 516 beds are really needed to meet, for JPS to step up and meet 50% of the need of the entire Tarrant County population 20 years into the future. So that's kind of the big picture, big number that you would need to get to make that investment in 50% need met. I'm going to turn this back over to Lori, but I'm certainly available for questions to pop back up as well.
Great. Okay, so Dr. Vaishon talked a little bit about positioning the delivery system to be as effective and efficient as possible. We want to do the best by patients, but also we want to have JPS thrive in an environment that reimburses for value, because that's the direction that things are moving nationally. I'll talk about what that means a little bit later, but I wanted to start by talking a little bit about finances. So on this slide, we talk about the inpatient market share and the payer mix that JPS currently has. So JPS serves a large proportion, or the market share, of Medicaid, low-income, uninsured residents. So the inpatient market share is approximately, so for Medicaid, it's 21.7%. And let me tell you what that means. So of the whole population in Tarrant County that's currently covered by Medicaid, JPS serves 21.7% of those people. They cover 32% of the uninsured. They cover, this is in the hospital, 13.7% of people with commercial insurance. And they cover 6.1% of people with Medicare. JPS provides 45.4% of uncompensated care costs in the entire county. That's on par with other public health systems in Texas. We did a comparative review. We looked at Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, again on par. JPS has three major revenue streams. So what is coming into JPS to support their work? One is the net patient service revenue, so what they get from patients or from insurance, and that's 43.7%. So that's on par with these other sites as well. Parkland, for example, was a little higher. That was at 47%. So they have 47% of net patient service revenues supporting their system. And then there's property tax, as you know, and that's almost 40%. That's also on par with the other systems. I think the only outlier we had in that comparative group was Houston. So Harris Health System has 49% of the property tax their revenue stream is 49% of tax. And finally, supplemental Medicaid funding is 18.4%. So these three funding streams add up to 100%. Net patient service revenues is 43, property tax almost 40, and supplemental Medicaid 18. JPS's long-term financial health, and this is HMA's finding and recommendation, would be much improved if it increased market share of Medicare, which is a very good payer, the exchange, which is the marketplace, the Obamacare exchange, again commercial insurance, and other private sector revenues, so again commercial insurance. So this would allow JPS to develop and sustain a patient-based revenue that's less dependent on property tax or increasing Medicaid supplemental funding. And we know what's been, the last month we've experienced from the federal government back and forth, threatening of cuts to Medicaid. And so we don't know exactly what the future is going to be. And so our sense is that if you had more investment in more funding streams from commercial insurance and from Medicare, that you'd be more stable financially. There were themes from many of our interviews and from some of the community forums that said, we don't want JPS competing with the private sector. We really want them to just focus on the needy. But quite frankly, JPS can't focus solely on the needy. They wouldn't be able to exist. They wouldn't be sustainable. It's this type of payer mix that allows them to be sustainable. They need to draw down funding from other sources besides property tax, which again is only 40% of their revenue, and more than just Medicaid. So we wanted to make that point and make it clearly.
I want to add to that.
Yeah.
From a financial perspective, I agree with you. But from a mission-oriented standpoint, JPS is the only hospital network in the county that is charged legally with the task of caring for the indigent population. Okay.
My only disagreement with that would be is that every one of these hospitals that call themselves nonprofit,
that's right,
are required by law to provide charity care. In order to maintain the nonprofit status, a certain percentage of their revenue must be, or they must put out a certain percent of charity care or they lose their nonprofit status.
Right. I was going to add to that. Let me finish what I'm trying to say here, so y'all can jump in. So in that role, I agree financially we have to diversify our payer mix so we can maintain a financial health that is sufficient enough for us to continue to expand our care for the indigent population. I do understand that. Okay, I'm completely in support of that financial position. What I'm saying here is JPS should take the leadership position in the indigent care by understanding it. You know, JPS talks a lot about center of excellence, right? I believe JPS should create a center of excellence for indigent care. That population is unique, right?
Yes.
Okay? And provide that leadership in working with the nonprofit organizations that the judges talk about and leading, coordinating, collaborating. So collectively, all the healthcare institutions in Tarrant County focus in taking care of this population, much like what has been happening in the transportation world. Okay? We have multiple jurisdictions. We have multiple competing interests in the county when it comes to transportation. But because of the governance model, we have TRTC, we have SET, we have the Regional Transportation Council, we have TxDOT, we have NTTA, and we have meetings, regulations, and so forth. But ultimately, we all come together to solve the transportation challenges in Tarrant County, irregardless of who we are and what interest we promote. To do that, we need someone to step up and take that leadership role.
That's right.
So my point is, yes, I agree with you on the financial part, but I think JPS should step up and take that leadership role, okay, along with the support of the convening power, influence of this court, so we can do that. I don't have the intricate details of how to do that, but it seems to me that in order to solve, at least in order to meet the care of the indigent population now and in the future, something has to happen, a lot more than what has been happening in the past. And that's my my take on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that was put very articulately,
Can I
and I'm
say
going
something
to
there?
be addressing it. Yeah.
Yes, sir. You. I'm not presiding over the court. You are.
You're both right. JPS does have the mission to take care of the indigent health care needs of our population. By the same token, the not-for-profits have a responsibility to do charity care at least up to the amount of the tax break that they get, because their millions of dollars worth of real estate is not on the tax rolls. That's a responsibility that they have. But JPS needs to be the leader. What I wanted to point out is that we've been through a phase at JPS where we focused on bringing in private payers to help balance the payer mix. And what happened is that we got so caught up in driving to bring in those private payers that we did it at the expense of the indigent. That cannot be allowed to happen ever again at JPS. Our mission is to take care of the indigent. To the extent that we've got excess capacity and can bring in those with a payer source, excellent. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
But our mission is to take care of the indigent.
Right, exactly, and that's
not
why
to chase after private
Well,
dollars.
and I want to jump back in on a little bit of that.
Go for it.
I think that if we simply take, your statistics have shown that I think we're only taking care of, was it 40, it was about 26% of the indigent, I believe.
Primary care.
32% of the payer mix for inpatient hospitalization for uninsured, for instance.
Right, so if you want to take
So whatever it is, it's far from anywhere near what the indigent population is.
It's 45% of the uncompensated care, however.
And I think what I would say is that the one place where this differs a little bit from transportation is that these folks, whether they show up at Harris or whether they THR or Baylor or Medical City or JPS or wherever, they're going to have, for the most part, the same illness, or they're going to have the same ailments that are going to have to be taken care of. I think where, and whereas in transportation, the federal government's kind of got the interstate system and the state's kind of got the, and those types of roads are more complicated if it's a federal road and it's an interstate system versus if it's a farm to market road versus if it's a neighborhood road. And the level of complexity that goes along with each one of those is a little bit different. It's also the teaching part of the deal. In the past, I think we have seen that most of the residencies have been at JPS. And I believe that over the next several years, my guess is through kicking and screaming at JPS and at all the other hospitals, we're going to see the residency programs expanded significantly because Dr. Flynn has said he wants to at least double the number of residents that we currently have in Tarrant County. And so I think there's going to be some putting together of all these hospitals. The ideal thing would be to say, okay, THR, we want you to specialize in, I'm not going to say a particular one, because let's just say this specialty in Baylor, this specialty in Plaza, this specialty in JPS, this specialty in Cook, that specialty. But they're not going to do it. And the reason they're not going to do it is because they know that they get higher reimbursements for certain things over the other, and if they give all the ones that we get no reimbursement on or very low reimbursement, I guess they're going to give those to JPS. And as our revenue stream goes down, then one of two things are going to happen. We're going to do less of a percentage, you said 45, whatever the percentage is, it's going to get a lot lower if we don't have the private dollars coming in or the uninsured, Medicaid, Medicare, anything that comes with some sort of an insurance payment. Or we're going to raise our tax rate. And I've got an idea that 5 of us up here are not going to vote to triple our tax rate, because right now we've said that our revenue, overall revenue is about a third, 37-point-something%.
Right.
So if we had to do just the amount of work we're doing right now to maintain at 45 without those revenue sources, we're going to have to triple our tax rate. Anybody want to raise their hand?
No.
So I think we have to have a balance. We have to have a balance.
Yeah, that's the reality of a modern-day public hospital, to do that balance.
I think when you compare what goes on in transportation and how those projects work together and how people work together on them versus healthcare, there's a perception that the funding for transportation is what we call OPM, other people's money, coming from somewhere else. It's actually not, but there's that perception. It's coming from the federal government, 90%, 80%. Where healthcare, in our case, we have to pay. Our taxes have to pay the bill. Now, sure, we get reimbursements for services, but we don't get reimbursements to build a building or staff. So that is one of the perceptions, I think, that we have to think about when we're comparing those two objectives with transportation and then healthcare and how that's put together and where the money comes from.
But certainly I'm not an expert in the healthcare industry. I was referring to the overall collaborative concept. Somehow There got to be an integrated delivery model out
Yes.
there in which private hospitals, nonprofit hospitals, along with public hospitals, and all the primary care doctors will have access to the same data and collaborate somehow to take care of the indigent population. And also we got to work together to cultivate a culture of wellness. Because we
Did you look at my slides? Because
That is a very
those are
good
the next
point.
3 slides.
I mean, I think
that's not going to happen.
the ability to share information, the most exciting thing for me in this area at least, is that all of the major healthcare providers, as far as hospitals, are all on the same information system. They're all on Epic. And to me, that says we've got the possibility of everybody communicating about that same patient that may end up at all 4 or 5 hospital groups in the same year.
Right, right. So let's talk about integrated delivery systems. But before I move on to that slide, I just want to say that one major opportunity right now, and we talked earlier about how rapidly the over 65 population is growing, that's a real opportunity, Medicare. So that's something to keep in mind in building the geriatric service line of JPS. So let's move on to positioning for value-based payment systems. So the sustainability of the JPS Health Network requires a highly functioning integrated delivery system. So what does that mean for those of you who are not familiar with those terms? It means that JPS is a health network. It's primary care, it's specialty, it's behavioral health, it's hospital. It's one network that does all of those things, but that it's integrated. It's not just you have the players without the team, you actually have a team. So you need to know what the right hand is doing and the left hand is doing. So let's say you have a person who is coming consistently to Arlington Community Health Center, and they hit the hospital. We need to make sure that that health center knows that, and that there's communication back and follow-up back, and so that each part of the system is engaged with the other parts of the system, and it works as an integrated whole. Okay, so once you have an integrated delivery system that's working well, then you're well positioned for alternative payments, so payments that are based on value and not just on volume. So we haven't talked about this, but it's something that you may be familiar with. So traditionally, health systems have been paid for providing service. So let's say I'm a provider, and every time someone comes into my health center, I get $100. I want to see that person a lot, right? Because I get paid for the visit. I might even have them come in to tell them about a negative lab result. It might not be the most efficient thing to do, but I get paid for it, right? So things are shifting now. They're trying to incentivize health centers and health systems to provide the right care, to provide high-value care. And how do you measure that? You measure that by looking at quality, by looking at health outcomes, by looking at patient experience and cost. So those kinds of things. So that's the way health payment systems are moving, and you need to make sure your delivery system is aligned with that, or else you might lose your shirt. So, for example, if you have several patients with diabetes, you want to make sure that they're well managed so that they don't wind up in the hospital with an amputation or with some other complication, because you could have kept them well. But if you're getting paid for value, let's say you're getting paid a total cost of care for a population or for an individual, then you're going to lose your shirt if you don't manage those patients well, right? You have a certain amount of money to spend, and you want to keep them well, because if they get to the hospital and they spend a lot of money, you're going to lose a lot. So for JPS to do well, they need to really be well positioned for these types of payments and to be as effective and efficient as they possibly can be. So one of the things they need to do is integrate behavioral health, because we need to look at the whole person, and one of the most expensive patient populations are those people who have behavioral health issues. They have everything else too, and they have behavioral health issues. So integrating behavioral health is a really important thing that they are doing and will continue to do. Reaching out to populations to make sure that they stay healthy, that they're coming in for cancer screenings and other types of screenings. To provide care management for patients with complex chronic conditions, to make sure they know how to manage their own condition and stay well. So you know how it used to be, right? We used to have a hospital, and that was the moneymaker. And then they started some clinics just to recruit people, to get people to fill up those beds. And it's totally flipped on its head now. It's completely different. It's build as much ambulatory outpatient as you can, keep those patients as well as you can, decrease the size of your hospitals, and only, hospitalize people who really need to be in the hospital, but keep them well, because that's how you're going to thrive in this new payment environment. So as we talk about integrated delivery systems, it may not be just within JPS, but there are all sorts of folks out there that are low-income, uninsured, that maybe don't, have a medical home or are going somewhere else. So making those partnerships, as you were talking about, Mr. Wynn, with other health systems, with other primary care providers, to collectively take on risk for those patients that are low income and uninsured, because they all have risk. So that's a way of creating an integrated delivery system that is maybe virtually connected, right, as you were saying. There's a lot of potential there. And whereas JPS has lots of partnerships with others and doing really good work, I think there's some opportunity there to look to define other synergies and strengths and win-win arrangements, and perhaps a virtually integrated delivery system for the low-income, uninsured population in the entire county. Right now we have people that have JPS connection that might be living in one part of the county that don't even go to the JPS health center because it's too far and they're going to a free clinic. So it's, we need to take a look at the whole county and how we can partner with others to make sure that the needs of those patients are met. So we're a bit over time, but I just wanted to make a quick touch on prevention and social determinants of health. So we recommend a more formal and strategic alliance between JPS and the Tarrant County Public Health Department to look at countywide planning and implementation to prevent health conditions that are of high prevalence and cost that are amenable to change, like diabetes, like preterm births that are resulting in infant mortality, and also looking at social determinants of health. We know that it's only about 10% of health outcomes are due to having access to health care. 90% is stable housing, education, employment, access to healthy food, those kinds of things. And public hospitals are starting to participate more and more in ensuring cross-sector strength to reduce health problems and disease and promote health. So I think that's all we had for today. So questions on any of what Greg and I talked about? Or should we?
In what you see out there in the marketplace, when you talk about collaboration between JPS and other organizations and with public health and so forth, I know Charlie and Mr. Early are basically having their hands full, just dealing with the internal operation of JPS.
Yep.
Who's going to be working to communicate and collaborate and building that collaborative model and collecting data?
Right. It's a challenge, but there are some models out there. So, for example, there's something called housing first. So we know that if you can't release someone from the hospital into an unsafe, housing environment. So what happens is that they stay in the hospital longer than they would otherwise have to. And we know that having safe, secure housing is really critical for people to recuperate, to continue to manage their chronic conditions. So there is a cost savings there. You release people early into housing that's safe and secure, there's a cost saving to the system. So there needs to be initial investment. But again, these are, this is new territory, but there are these conceptual models, and it's actually happening in some places with participation from the public hospital system. Certainly not solely the public hospital's responsibility, but that's just one example.
Oftentimes the public hospital is taking on the responsibility or kind of catalyzing the beginning of that integrated delivery system for the whole county. That's happened in Cook County, Lake, San Francisco, where now they've gone so far as to insure the entire population. But it didn't start there.
Right.
It really starts with the public health saying we as a community are at risk for this population, right? The population that's going to be unable to pay for their primary care, or their specialty, or their hospital. We're at risk for that. The community, we're paying for it. We're getting bad outcomes. It's costing a lot. It can be done better, and it's a process of bringing together those parties that would be interested, as we were saying, having less low acuity patients come into their hospital, and to really see the community do better, for the health of the community to improve.
And
I'd like to point out that this collaborative model is not something that's new to JPS.
That's right.
As the lead agency in this 1115 waiver
That's right.
region, they have now the responsibility to collaborate with other institutions to design programs that will affect savings, that will affect health, that will be preventive in nature, and they only get paid when they achieve the agreed upon results. What we're talking about in this whole integrated healthcare system environment is that program on steroids. And I submit that the dollars that are saved through those types of interventions and collaborations led by JPS are sufficient to fund a more aggressive collaboration across many hospital systems, which is primarily what they're doing now through 1115 waiver.
Right. Right. There's been tremendous progress made in the last 10 plus years. So, well positioned to do that.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Okay. Are we ready for our next presenter? Okay. Before we do that, let me just recognize several people in the audience. Charlie Powell, obviously, is the chairman of the board of managers for the hospital district. Also, is Trent still here?
He just has,
Yeah. Trent Petty is a board member. He is also one of the liaisons from the board to the Blue Ribbon Committee. So, okay, so our next presenter is actually going to be from the firm of Percival. Sam Sears is the presenter today. They were looking more at the ambulatory planning aspect, the ambulatory care, and they've done a significant analysis of the county and the potential locations of new ambulatory care centers. And with that, Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. As DK mentioned, really one of the tasks during this engagement is to assess your ambulatory network. So if you think of your ambulatory network as essentially your footprint, right? It's not just your main hospital campus, it's the entire county. How many sites should you have out there? How big should they be? What is the scale of the whole operation? Are your current sites in the right location or not? So, so we started by assessing essentially what should that future footprint look like, and then we look at where you are today, and essentially how do you get from A to B? How do you fill that gap? What does the right size look like? And are your locations currently in the right locations? So with that, and I think this really follows up well on what Lori and Greg were talking about, especially around the integrated delivery systems. So what I'm going to present here is really the sort of outcome of that, the logistics. How many centers should you have? What does that integrated delivery system look like from a facility perspective? So if you think about why then do you want to develop these community health centers, right? It's about creating convenience for patients. It's about creating access for patients. It's about greater integration between JPS and its communities. One of the things we heard actually during the interview process was there seemed to be a little bit of a lack of awareness of all of JPS's locations, right? Everyone knows where the hospital is, but they don't necessarily know where some of the clinics are. So how do you address that? Some of that, frankly, could be maybe some more outreach or marketing, but some of that is putting up new centers so that there aren't gaps in the community. So the visibility is there. So every aspect of your population will have essentially a community health center within a 10-minute drive time. And as we looked at this, started to think through that, the plan really accomplishes that almost every part of the community will have a community health center within a 10-minute drive time. Your mission then is, of course, to serve the indigent population, addressing their population health needs. And as you think about, how to do that, and I know Greg and Lori touched on that a little bit, if you look at the poorer indigent populations, one of the big issues is, they tend to wait to the last minute and then they go to the hospital to seek their care. And that's not always the most appropriate site for that kind of care. So as you develop these community health centers out there, what you're really trying to do is get into more preventative care, getting into a mode that will then serve value-based reimbursement going forward. So if you think about preventative care, it's really about getting those conditions treated before they become something worse and you have to go to the hospital. So this helps really achieve your mission of greater care of the indigent population. Now, I think it's important to recognize here that JPS has already done a very good job, I think, of developing these health centers, especially over the last 10 years. These have really started to pop up. And one of the things I liked when we started to look into this was the model that they have. So these aren't necessarily small centers. One of the problems you see in a lot of areas is you have these sort of onesie, twosie primary cares out in the market. The model that JPS has implemented so far is to concentrate those physicians in one place, have other ancillary services like lab, x-ray, behavioral health, dental, have all those in one community health center. And that really helps achieve a lot of economies of scale, greater efficiencies, et cetera. So we like the model that's in place. So, sort of spoke to that first slide. The key findings then of this is, these new sites will then provide an alternative to main campus congestion. So right now there's a lot of issues, especially for patients coming to the campus for care. So if you think about a patient accessing the campus, especially for the family medicine clinic, they have to park, they have to find their way out there, they have to go to an elevator. It's much more convenient for them to have it close to where their home is. Not only that, but it's a lower cost setting for them. So if you think about it from the JPS perspective, patients that cost a lot less to treat in those clinic locations than they do at the hospitals. And it's also a lower investment expense. In other words, as you think about spending your capital dollars, the kind of space that you have to build out in the community is much cheaper than the kind of space you would have to build on the campus. So it's really the best financial resources, or best use of those fiduciary responsibilities. Basically the best use of those financial resources going forward to treat that kind of population. So as we think about this then, and the model that's in place, really the main task of this then was how do we leverage that success, that best practice model that you have, and leverage that into more targeted locations where access is needed most in the community. I do want to point out that while the focus of this really is on primary care, we did look at the behavioral health model, and we believe, and this is happening a lot in healthcare now, where behavioral health is embedded in primary care practices. So we think that's a good model going forward. Now, there are some operational issues with that and commingling of populations, but there's a way to do that right. And I think as we go forward and need to manage that population, it's really going to behoove JPS to have those services embedded in the different sites. These services could also be expanded into telehealth. They can also include geriatrics. You have one geriatric clinic now, but I think it might make sense to put those in some of these locations out there as well. In terms of specialty physicians, what we're looking at here is mostly, again, focus on that primary care. The vast majority of specialty care is going to be treated on campus, and there are significant facility issues that you're going to have to address on campus. But for now, as we looked at that, and even things like the cancer center fall under that specialty ambulatory services on campus, we really think the need is to address the campus issues for specialty services first before you start to go out and put those in the community. So I want to get into our process a little bit here. One of the ways we determined where you have gaps in the community was to do this prioritization exercise. So what we did is we developed evaluation criteria to essentially rank and prioritize your markets. this methodology used a lot of different healthcare metrics. It was really heavily focused on where do you have services today versus where are there gaps in services. And what you see on this map here is really a color chart that are the results of that. So we used all these different metrics and we came up with a score for every single zip code in your market. And so as you look at this map, the blue ones are the ones that have the greatest need. The red ones are the ones where you don't have as much need. Now that's not to say, if you think about that, that might be counterintuitive right now because, right, the greatest concentration of the indigent population actually is in the central part, which a lot of that is red. The reason why in this exercise those rank lower is because that's where you already have sites today. So what you want to do then is fill those gaps. So the blue areas are really the gaps in this market. That doesn't mean that those other sites don't need to be addressed at some point as that population grows. But as we looked at this and looked at where the greater need is, it's really out more on the periphery. I'm going to just grab my water for a second. if you don't mind. So a couple things also noteworthy here. If you look down south where you've got Mansfield and Burleson, only 20% of the Burleson population is actually in Tarrant County.
So this map right here does not really reflect Tarrant County's boundaries, does it?
Correct. And basically it's every zip code that at some point at least touches Tarrant County. So in Burleson's case, 80% of that zip code actually is not in Tarrant County. And for that reason, as we looked at these, this is what I would sort of call the qualitative overlay. So as we looked at this, you want to use common sense and think about other issues other than just the score of this. So Burleson came out with a very high score. However, since only 20% of the population fits into Tarrant County, we essentially lowered that because whatever you do there, you're not going to get necessarily paid for some of those patients. So it didn't make sense to focus on Burleson as much. On the flip side of that, Mansfield, some of Mansfield is not actually in Tarrant County. However, 97% of it is. So that is a significant population that you want to treat through your various reimbursement mechanisms. So this map was sort of the starting point as we did this to identify the gaps in the service population, primarily, again, focused on primary care. Any questions about that? Okay. So on this next slide, number 6, phase planning of suggested sites. So when we looked at the numbers of doctors, and I know Greg went over that with you, we then translated that into sites. So most of these are going to have anywhere from 6 to 10 primary care physicians at each site. So we came up with the 4 sites. Phase 1, then, let me step back. We did this in 2 phases. So essentially phase 1 over the next 10 years is filling that gap, ensuring that your footprint, your ambulatory network, serves the needs of the entire population in terms of convenience and access. So that was kind of stage 1. Stage 2, I think after you develop these 4 sites, you are going to have that 10-minute drive time for everything. So I think phase 2 then is after that population grows, and this is after 10 years, you then want to reassess your footprint. And you may end up relocating some sites. You may end up expanding some sites when you have land or building capacity where you can actually expand into that. And you may want to even consolidate some sites or even replace existing sites altogether if it's no longer meeting the needs of the population. But again, in that first phase, there's a desire to get those 4 centers open, frankly, as quickly as possible. Doing that in 5 years, I think, will be challenging. Especially can you get the financial resources in that time period to do 1 every single year, number 1. Number 2, can you recruit that many primary care docs to each site? So I think that is challenging, but somewhere in that 5 to 10 year time frame, I think it makes sense to develop these sites. And we'll go through each of these, but at a pretty high level. A 5th site was also considered. That's essentially as you moved, that's in the HEB area. You're building a new community health center, but it's moving a little bit to the northeast, so that might create a gap. And then I think you just need to look at the numbers and where those patients are coming from. And if that gap gets too big, you may do a 5th site, but that's a little bit down the road. So let me go through these 4. Let me kind of orient you to how we did these. So as we looked at these each of these, we looked at a couple of things. Number one, what are those targeted zip codes? Remember that prioritization, we ranked and scored every single zip code. So we wanted to get sites that would either capture the highest ranking zip code or the highest cluster of zip codes, right? Because every facility is going to not just serve one zip code, but the surrounding zip codes. So in South Arlington, you can see what we have here. So there's the red sort of shaded area, which is really the capturable population that we're looking at that is underserved today, that could be captured with a new community health center. You can see that yellow dot right at the top of this map. That's where your Southeast Arlington site is currently right now. So just using that as sort of an understanding of where they are. So that's why some of that population above that doesn't need to get there. Clearly, this is going to be a big Mansfield site to a certain extent, but a lot of that southern Arlington population, especially those on some of those east-west roads, this would actually be a lot more convenient access to them. So this was kind of site number one. The other thing on each of these pages, if you look at the lower left, and we talked about some of the issues with each of these to the extent that there may be some geographic issues or other issues. That's in some of the language here. This table at the bottom, visit volume, that is the volume for the clinic that is closest to this area. So right now, that yellow dot up there, Southeast Arlington, that is the volume. Now, if you look at that, you can see this huge jump from FY15 to fiscal year 2016 of almost 14% or 7,000 patients. That's a very 57,000 visits for a community health center is huge. So what
that's the Dow Worthington Gardens.
Pardon?
Those numbers down there at the bottom.
Yes.
Represent the Dow Worthington Garden location.
Yes,
That's not Dow Worthington.
Well, it's called the Southeast.
It's in Arlington.
Southeast Arlington Medical Home.
Arkansas and Cooper.
But it's that dot.
It is that dot, yes.
It says, okay.
It is that dot.
Okay.
So some of that red population, technically is within 10 minutes of that. There is going to be some overlap, but you are going to create much greater convenience for people down in there. And again, of course, for the Mansfield population, that's still a pretty significant drive right now.
So you're probably looking at somewhere along that 1187, 157, 287 corridor.
Yeah, I mean, if you see this thing they're called potential target sites, that's in the sort of second line at the top there. We did the Walmart as just a sort of, if you look at density and access, for each of these we kind of looked at a targeted site. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to do that. I think when you get into site selection, you want to get into that nitty-gritty detail. But just to give you sort of a general sense of looking at it in access, that's probably what makes sense right now, at least for capturing fully all of that red population. All right, let me go to the next one then. So this is the Southwest ACC. And again, you can see that yellow dot, which is the South Campus Health Center. And again, you can see pretty big volume growth numbers, 17% in the last year alone, although there was a little bit of a dip the year before.
Most of it.
So a lot of that population doesn't have, again, great access. You will probably capture a little bit of the Burleson population here, but just really the northern one. So as you think about a location to really capture everybody in this red zone, and again, if you look at those highways, those can often be significant barriers. So if you think about how a community sees themselves and sees what their community is, often those highways are sort of demarcation lines of different communities. So even though that yellow dot may be close to some of that northern part of the red area, it's really a different community for them. And so
Is that yellow dot by all the pits?
No, that yellow dot is at the resource connection.
Yeah, Viola Pits is to the northwest of this. It's actually wouldn't show up on this map, but if you see where Benbrook is and you go north, Viola Pits is closer to that.
That's resource connection, JD.
That's resource connection, the yellow dot there.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're going to have a whole lot of people west of Chisholm Parkway use. Now, you might up in the Benbrook area, I don't know, but it would seem to me like you're again going to be down in that particular instance, that lower right-hand corner. But that's something to be determined later on. You are saying though that red area
yes
has a significant amount of
visit volume.
Visit. But the visit volume
And population.
is so far below what we just saw out of that South Arlington, Mansfield area.
Correct. But that's, remember, this isn't necessarily capturing a lot of this population now. That is the volume for that South Campus Health Center right now.
Yeah, I'm betting you that yellow dot is collecting all of its volume from north and east of 35. North of 820.
Yep.
Or 183, I guess it is there. And
North and east of 35, yes, exactly. And I would agree with that, which is why we're sort of focusing on this part, because we think that location right now is serving that other population and not the population in the rest of the red area. So it is serving north of 35, again, which we sort of looked at as a demarcation line, in east of that other highway. Now, the South Arlington site by far had the greatest visit volume. So as you look at the rest of these, none of them had that much. And that's a bigger site. It has specialty care, so it has greater capacity just in terms of the number of providers there. But as we looked at this, and again, it's really based on kind of all these numbers and where the need for primary care doctors are, and the fact that the people in the red area here don't necessarily have great access to that site. So if you look at the next one then, this is the Northwest North Central Community Health Center proposal. You can see again, this is the yellow dot here is the Gertrude Tarpley Health Center. And as you look at what you're trying to capture here, and there is some greater, there is more affluent population in some of this area relative to the other areas, but nonetheless the numbers of the indigent population still support a center here. And as you think about where that might go, in this one we probably looked at a couple of areas. One is that Business 287, probably near Bailey Boswell would make the most sense. Although you could also look where sort of 81 meets Tarrant Parkway. So that in all of those populations, for them to go to Gertrude Tarpley right now, if you think about how that population is going to flow down, you want to kind of get it to some place that's a natural flow. There's really no natural way for them to get to Gertrude Tarpley. In fact, this whole area is a little
You got 35, you don't want to get anywhere near 35.
Yeah.
You're 10 minutes and you just get past the intersection.
And so that's certainly a need for this population. And again, that site had a big jump from FY14 to FY15. The last of the four then is Northwest Central Community Health Center. This is really focusing on the white settlement area. Now there are actually two yellow dots here. One of them is the Viola Pits, the other one is Diamond Hill. So those sort of captured different populations, but there was sort of a gap there in the sort of Midwest, sort of central part of that to the west, really around that white settlement area, that when you look at those numbers, and this is a pretty heavy indigent area, it definitely would be able to support another health center. This one might be a little bit smaller than the other ones, but this is the fourth recommendation for a site. You also actually own 11 acres at the bottom of that blue circle there. So that's a potential site for development. So that one could actually get moved on pretty quickly.
Westover Hills.
Stirring the pot.
Just put it right there in Westover Hills.
Yeah. So if you're wondering then what these kind of, what this model and size of these facilities look like.
You don't happen to have a map on your number 5, do you?
I don't believe in this presentation, no. There's a larger, fuller report that I'm sure you have access to that will have that. And there are other actually areas, if you think about the whole Tarrant County, there is a need for primary care way up in the northeast corner of Tarrant County, closer to the airport. But that is a pretty affluent population. There's just not a huge indigent population that from a mission perspective you don't necessarily need to serve. So there's a gap there just in terms of the numbers, but not in terms of the type of population that you're trying to serve. So that's just an example of how we really laser focused on your mission to serve the indigent care. So this page 11 then, this is essentially a model space program that can range anywhere from really 20,000 square feet to 35,000 square feet. And you can see essentially how that space program builds out, what's in there in terms of primary care, pediatrics, women's health, behavioral health, imaging, pharmacy, lab, et cetera. And you kind of see what gets up into that. So this is essentially the model that we're proposing would go into these 4 centers. Now, that again is the ambulatory footprint, but again, it's really focused on that primary care, behavioral health, dental, et cetera. We did want to consider specialty care, and in most circumstances, we would usually come out of this process with recommendations for specialty care centers out in your market. And I think at the end of the day, you probably are going to need a second one. Right now, other than the campus, Arlington is really the only area where you have specialty services off campus out in your community.
Can I ask you a question back on I think I'm just missing something here.
Sure.
On page 11, I mean, you talk about your primary care. That looks like 1,400 square feet per exam room?
No, that's 1,400 per physician. So a physician would have multiple exam rooms. Okay. Usually about, so I'd have to go back and look at the data. I believe it's around 2.5 exam rooms per physician. Might be 3. Okay. But so it includes sort of all that space.
So
their office,
all that plus his office, plus the doctor's office, and
correct,
nurse's station, and everything that go along with that.
Correct. Well, yes, but not things like the lobby and the.
I see the lobby and that mentioned down there.
But no, it would include all that. Yeah, I mean, obviously the size of their space is going to be 10 by 12 or something like that.
So most exam rooms I've been in, if they're 100
12 by
12,
feet, yeah. So it's all that really goes into that, and it's a pretty good metric. I mean, you see people going a little bit. You could probably do it as slim as 1,000 square feet per physician, but I think you're better off doing around 1,200, 1,400. Especially, care today, a lot of family members go in, right. and that I think is a huge consideration in this as well. So going back again to the specialty services overview, again, it's really on the main campus or in Arlington. As we went through this, as I said, we really saw a huge need on campus to address the specialty clinic situation. Right now it's inefficient, it's at capacity, and I'll show you some of this in a second. It's really not suitable, frankly, for the current standards of patient care in the campus right now, so it needs to be addressed one way or the other. And as you think about building new hospitals on the campus, et cetera, and there may be things that happen before that, like an ambulatory surgery center, whatever you plan to do going forward, you really need to address this need. And think of it as one big plan that's coordinated with all that activity. So sort of what we're suggesting here is we don't want to lose sight of these specialty care clinics. Part of our task was, I know you've had consultants in here before to do master facility plans, other plans, et cetera. Part of our task was to review all of that and to see, does it still make sense? Is there anything missing? And as we looked at all of this, probably the thing that was missing the most was a specific detailed plan to deal with these ambulatory clinics. Right now, they've essentially, in those plans, identified 3 areas for potential location. Reconfigured space in that west outpatient building where a lot of that is today, or a new MOB on campus, or a new ambulatory specialty center on campus. And frankly, the MOB and the ambulatory specialty center could be combined into one entity as well. But the specific locations, at least for most of those, haven't been identified. It has for a couple, and I'll get into that in a minute. We also see that the things like the cancer center, which needs new space, our recommendation is clearly to do that on campus. That should be an on-campus cancer center. It can be standalone and sort of on the edges of the campus, but that should be there as well. The other thing that was not considered, remember, when Greg was up here before showing you those specialty physician numbers, there's really a very aggressive profile of bringing more specialists on. And so I think the prior plans didn't necessarily look at that sort of aggressive specialty recruitment. So if you're able to pull that off and bring more specialists, you're going to need space for that, and that wasn't really addressed in the previous plan as well. So let me go to just kind of orient you on campus, and excuse me if you know some of this already, but there is that essentially outpatient clinic building. You can see on the second floor of that, a lot of the locations are in that one. The fourth floor is where you have the family medicine clinic. Space is very limited here. It's landlocked. It's overutilized. All the waiting areas are actually out in there. There's like this narrow corridor outlining the entire clinic, and patients literally sit in chairs outside in that corridor. So it's very hard for people to sort of track where the patients are. It's hard to understand what's going on. It's very congested. It makes getting through the corridors difficult. So clearly, clinic space is needed here. So as patients come to the JPS hospital for specialty clinic services, it's really, frankly, not a great experience right now because of the sort of infrastructure issues of how it's laid out today. The ortho patients are up an elevator right now, so you have a lot of people coming in with orthopedic issues that it's kind of hard to get around with bad knees, bad hips. So that's clearly not an ideal situation to sort of have them have to go to an elevator and then go to that. Also, the family medicine clinic, which is the most heavily trafficked of the clinics, is on the fourth floor. So right now, those really just aren't convenient locations for that kind of care. I wanted to just touch on, and this is another location, so on the main campus, this is the third floor of the main building that has cardiology, et cetera. I haven't shown every ambulatory clinic here. There's also 1350 and 1400 South Main where some of the medical clinics are. There's a geriatric center on Magnolia, and then there's the cancer center out there. So not everything is shown here, but what that speaks to is a great disbursement of services. So it's sort of inefficient. So when people come in for different kinds of care, they're constantly having to go for a different place, and it's just not intuitive, and it's not easy for patients to navigate that. What was discussed in the prior planning was moving orthopedics to level 1, then having the family clinic backfill some of the other stuff as urgent care moves out. So there was some recommendations in here, which I think in a vacuum makes sense. But again, I think as you go planning forward, you're going to want to look at a more all-encompassing solution that maybe addresses all of these in one place. Orthopedics as well may want to be closer to a surgical center, outpatient surgical center that you have there as well. So some of those could be done, but I think, again, the main message I want you to come away with this is coordinated planning for all of this really needs to take place to understand where all that should go. So just quickly, then, the Arlington services. Right now, we've got Barden Road and that medical home southeast. That medical home southeast is where that 57,000 visits, primary care visits were. So you can see they also have specialty care here, which given the size of the Arlington population, I think makes a lot of sense. Barden Road is really specialties that serve the ambulatory surgery center right next door to it, which is the ex-hospital, which isn't great space. So when you build a new ambulatory surgery center, assuming that you do at some point, that's probably going to be a better location for these. And when that happens, it essentially makes the need for Barden Road obsolete. So there'll be likely a relocation of those physicians as well. So what are our recommendations then in terms of the specialty clinics? This is really sequential steps. First, look at all the work that was previously done so you don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel. Take what's feasible out of that and identify and develop on-campus solutions for these specialty clinics and services. So that can include service centers of excellence, for example, the cancer center. You know, you can have a cardiology center. You can really create a much better, efficient clinic environment for a lot of these services that are more high profile and going to be more likely to attract additional patients. This will include the likely relocation of the cancer center and may include the Barden Road Specialty Clinic. The other thing here is if you look at 1C, identify the disposition and backfill opportunities. So remember, once you build a new bed tower, you're going to be vacating quite a significant amount of space. Over 200,000 square feet of space is vacated. That to date, nobody has planned anything for that space. So there are a number of options there. You could demolish that space. You could use some of it for some of the outpatient clinic. Again, being careful not to have too much disbursement, but some of those services may make sense there, things like PT, et cetera. Or it could just be other administrative uses. If you have buildings out there where maybe a lease is expiring or it's not working well, you can backfill that space with other administrative services or other types of services. So again, the message here is let's not plan any of these in a vacuum. Let's coordinate all of that going forward. But I think, as you go out to the community and ask for that, they're going to naturally ask what you're doing with the rest of the hospital. So I think having a plan for that it will be a critical part of this. And finally, the second step here is once that solution has been identified and is on the way to implementation, I think, once that opens, that's when you're going to want to start to consider maybe a second specialty clinic out in the community, probably somewhere in the northwest, north central region of your market. But you've got Arlington right now, so when we say a second one, we probably mean around there. But again, I think you really need to wait until you address those issues on campus first. So that was the presentation on ambulatory. Any questions, comments?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Good job. Thank you.
Are we ready for our final presenter?
Yep.
Very good. So our final one is Patrick Chambers. He is with Cummings, and Cummings was responsible for looking at the existing facilities and making a determination as to their usefulness. Patrick.
They were. Good afternoon. I appreciate your time today. Hope everybody's still awake and engaged and ready to look at the inpatient portion of the campus. Sam talked more about the outpatient and the ambulatory network piece. The focus of this discussion and our study was really on the inpatient component on the main campus. We looked at, Sam mentioned some of the previous studies and reports, and a part of our engagement was to evaluate those and take those into consideration as we worked with HMA to look at the current situation. So we updated what those 2014, the latest proposed construction project report had said, updated that to 2017 dollars, and then considered what HMA was proposing and how those worked. And as a part of our study, we did a thorough analysis of the existing campus conditions, both from an architectural standpoint and an MEP standpoint. That's mechanical, electrical, plumbing. I tend to use a lot of abbreviations from the construction world, so if any of those don't ring with you, just let me know. I can explain those to you. And one other piece of what we looked at as part of a follow-on to doing that existing conditions analysis was to look at options for using renovation of the existing buildings as opposed to new construction to deliver the program. This is a map that was in the 2014 Broadus and Blue Cottage study, shows the existing main campus. The blue and gray are all existing buildings, and the brown color there with Trinity Springs are all existing buildings, and the orange is where they had focused on putting the new facilities in that report.
Which color?
I'm sorry?
Orange.
Orange, yeah. Oh, I got a little bit messed up there. So one of the things we looked at first was validating the need for the inpatient beds. And the first part of that was working with HMA and understanding the population growth and what that impact meant to the beds. So in the 2014 study, they had recommended 496 inpatient beds at completion. So that includes the existing pavilion, which is fairly recent vintage. It would not be renovated, so it's adding a tower adjacent to that. And that plan included 2 floors on top of it of shell space, which would be vacant, which could be is typical strategy when you're looking at a long-term master plan, because that allows you the opportunity in the future to more quickly construct and occupy some beds. So then we looked at the reduced length of stay options, which is a little bit less aggressive than the 1% that HMA had recommended at 20 years, would bring that bed need to 664. In addition to simply satisfying the volume needs and the population needs, if you think of a hospital, it's somewhat of a machine. Your patient comes to the emergency room, they're evaluated, they need to be admitted. Oftentimes they go to an ICU bed and they start their recovery and then step down to a medical surgical bed. Well, what often happens, and what we've seen on our tour at JPS, is the patient presents at the emergency room and needs care, but there's no vacant ICU bed. So they get housed in the emergency department for an extended period of time, which takes up those emergency department room bays, which then backs up into the waiting room. So there are patients in the waiting room that are waiting to get treated in the emergency room, but it's such a backlog all the way throughout the hospital that they can't, it's felt in the emergency room, but the problem is really in the beds, the number of those beds, and making sure that you have an efficient number of beds to achieve that throughput. Another, and this is more of an existing condition situation, is the beds in the existing tower, the bedrooms themselves, are undersized. Current design practices are that we design rooms with three main zones, which is the patient zone, the family zone, and the caregiver zone. In those rooms to provide adequate room for those needed treatments. And in addition to what we're looking at with JPS, you bring in the education component. That's more people in the room, so you need even more space to be able to provide that care. The other shortcoming we saw is that I believe JPS is at approximately 60% semi-private beds. That's 2, maybe 3 beds per room. So, there's a difference when you talk about rooms versus beds. So you may very well have a lot more beds than you have rooms, and that means you have multiple beds in one room. And that's certainly not in keeping up with best practices and current standards. There's a couple of really major components that we look at as the reason why hospitals are going away from the semi-private rooms. It's a significant driver of patient satisfaction, which, as we were talking earlier, is becoming more and more a factor in reimbursement. So it maximizes reimbursements by increasing patient satisfaction by going to a private room. And the other thing is improved infection control. There are studies being done right now that are supporting the notion that having a private room reduces the rates of infection, which reduces the cost of providing care. So we looked at, then we looked, as part of our assessments of the existing building, is what is this existing, primarily the existing tower where most of the patient beds are. What are the conditions that we have there, and how can that or could that be reused for current practice? So there's some significant limitations. The bed tower was built in the 1960s. So it was built around 1960 standards, which are significantly different from what we're looking at today. And if you think about the floor-to-floor height in that building is 11 feet. And what that means is from where my feet are right here to where somebody's feet are up there, and I guess that's maybe the roof, so hopefully nobody's up there, but
there's somebody up there.
Well, there probably are. They're just doing a little work. That is the dimension that we're talking about. And healthcare needs today are so heavy on mechanical and electrical components to move air through, particularly move air through the patient rooms in order to achieve that infection control, that you have to have some amount of space. So that's why floor to floor is 14 to 15 feet. That doesn't mean that the room has a 15-foot ceiling. It probably has about an 8 or a 9-foot ceiling. but above that ceiling is all of the infrastructure needed to support the care in that room. One other thing we looked at was the footprint of that existing tower is significantly small, and healthcare bed units are typically operated on per nurse, a nurse per patient ratio, and right now 30 beds is about the optimal bed unit size, and that's what we have. We'll show you in a minute when we talk about the new tower, but the existing footprint there is not big enough to provide that level, that amount of beds. You're looking at maybe 14 to 17 beds per unit, which creates a highly inefficient model. So you're having to increase your staffing level to be able to provide the care for those spaces. And if we did look at what if you did actually renovate that tower to use it for inpatient beds, you still wouldn't be able to meet the capacity that we're talking about with expanding for the population. So even in the best case, if you use renovation, you're still going to need a new tower. So that creates a highly inefficient model of beds on both sides of Main Street separated. So you're trying to run one bed tower in two different places. So it creates some issues there. And the existing mechanical and electrical plumbing systems in that building are significantly beyond their life expectancy. So any work in that building would require a complete replacement of those systems. We did actually take a look at what would the relative costs be for replacement or renovation of that facility for inpatient care versus new construction. And while the new construction per square foot number is higher, because of in an existing situation, you're dealing with an existing footprint, we typically find that that's about 15 to 20% inefficient. So you'd have to build 15 to 20% more square footage in a renovation environment to provide the same amount of care that you're providing in a new facility. If you build a new facility, you can build it exactly the shape and size that you need. So it's much more highly efficient construction. And in a lot of the studies that we have done, which we do often looking at replace versus renovate, we find that the renovation cost is actually more expensive than a replacement cost because you're building less new square footage than you would have to renovate. And as I said a moment ago, the split inpatient units is a significant operational concern that JPS is living with right now. If you went on the tour, you saw a lot of the concerns and issues with patient transportation. And I guess the payoff of this is based on all of this review, we would not recommend using that existing tower for inpatient care. So we looked at the initial report in 2014 prepared by Blue Cottage had 496 total beds, and you can see this is not supposed to be a design representation, but just a more of a distribution representation of beds. You have the main tower, and as a part of that report, they did say leave the inpatient prisoner units in the main tower. The JPS pavilion is an existing building that would not be affected, and then on the right is what would represent the new tower. And as a part of that report, remember, we had 2 shell floors, so that brought it up to 496 beds. Initial cost estimate for that was $609 million. If we just look at cost escalation from 2014 to 2017, that estimate rises from $609 to $739 million. We're looking at
a little over 20% increase.
It's about 4% per year.
130 million.
A little bit over 4% per year. And that's, keep in mind, this includes the tower, all the site work to support that, the central plant, and the parking garage is included in that cost. We did our own estimate, came in a little bit lower, but it's in the ballpark. We found that plan would probably cost today about $719 million. So then, working with HMA and understanding their bed need projection, we came up with a cost if we were to complete the 2 shelled bed floors. So floor 9 and 10 on the lower right is no longer shell floor in this plan. It is actually filled with beds, and that would bring you up to 616 total beds. And then, discussing and thinking about the length of stay, how aggressive that was. This, again, it comes down to thoughts and discussions on how aggressive JPS wants to be with that length of stay projection. So we provided a cost to add an additional floor, so 60 more beds, which would bring the total bed count up to 676. That is the $830 million option. And just a sidebar here, the bed need projection is going to give you an exact number of beds. As you start to look at healthcare planning and how you plan bed floors, you can't add individual beds. You add them a floor or a unit at a time. So anytime you go up with more beds, you're going to go up at an increment of 30 to 60 beds to be able to cover the need. So oftentimes you'll end up with some surplus, but that's how that works with the planning and design.
You keep saying we're going to leave the prisoners over in the existing main tower. If we're not going to be doing things over in the existing main tower, then are we going to remember to check on them every day?
I would hope so. I think that was it's a fairly typical that you would find that corrections would be segregated from non-corrections.
So is that the only thing that's going to be in this 11 floors of this existing tower?
Well, you're jumping ahead of my presentation here.
Okay, I'm waiting.
He's known for
doing that.
I know.
He's known for doing no take it personal.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I like the way your brain is working on this. You're going right down the line here.
One of these for women, one of them for men.
What's that?
The 2 floors where the prisoners are.
Potentially, I'm not sure how that's going to be segregated.
And there is a reason for having the floor in between.
It's just where those they are right now.
Okay.
Those existing floors work better for the prisoners population.
Okay.
So we did look at a couple of cost saving opportunities. They're not massive as you look at a $700 to $800 million project. But the first one was maintain the existing materials management and laundry services in their current locations. Offer some cost savings, but there are some issues there right now. We didn't necessarily recommend this. We would say that this needs to be fully vetted with JPS staff to understand if they could support the new campus with their existing facilities. We looked at maintaining the food service department in the basement where it is right now. The cost savings was $10 million, not insignificant, but not significant enough to overcome some of the existing constraints and conditions that would create. So we didn't feel that was a good recommendation. One that we did believe was a prudent cost savings measure was based on our mechanical engineering plumbing study of the existing campus. We believe that the energy plants, there are 3 different energy plants on the campus that if they were optimized and coordinated, that they could serve the expanded campus without having to provide a new plant. So there's an opportunity for savings there. So that's the inpatient tower. Is there any other questions as we roll through that? So the next piece we looked at was the new behavioral health hospital. And you can see that on the lower left portion of the screen there, the orange component over to the left. The issues with behavioral health is the current bed totals 96 beds. As we've talked, those are significantly short of what those projections are today. In 2014, they identified a project that provided 148 new beds, again, plus a shell floor with 50 new beds, so the potential to have a new 198 behavioral health beds. And then, as Lori and Greg stated earlier, talked about the 516 bed need for the county. Some of the issues that are with the existing behavioral health system is just a limited bed count. And then an over-reliance, to get that bed count, several of those rooms are semi-private. And oftentimes in a behavioral health setting, when you'll have a patient that you can't have them in a semi-private. So based on the patient's behavior, you may have where you think you have 2 rooms and you have 1 because you can't put 2 patients together in 1 room. So again, that significantly reduces the capacity. And one of the things we saw on our tour was a concern with having the inpatient or the intake, the behavioral health emergency department, if you will, is on the 10th floor of the tower. So it's an agitated patient has to come in and present to the hospital, ride an elevator up to the 10th floor to be admitted. And I don't think they set this up on us, but if we were riding the elevator down, it got stuck. So we were in the elevator for a few minutes, and that with a psychiatric patient, that would have been a tremendously troubling situation. And then again, 3 separate locations across campus creates issues with patient transfers that are things that would be resolved with a more consolidated location. So the behavioral health hospital, again, walked through the same path. We looked at the 2014 cost estimate, escalated that to 2017, so it went from $102 million to 3 years later, $124 million. We did our own estimate, and it was a little bit higher in this case. It was $130 million. And as you can see from the layout, we have the 5th floor is our shell space. And based on our discussions at the time, there's been additional discussion with the Blue Ribbon Committee since this, but we added a price to complete the shell space. So completing 50 additional beds brought that cost up to $149 million. So, and again, talking about our vacated space, we had a renovation backfill plan. The 2014 Blue Cottage estimate was $94 million. We escalate that to 2017. And again, this is the last piece that's built. So this is on the tail end of all of the new construction as you go back in and do the renovation. So it carries a pretty heavy escalation burden because we wouldn't be doing that construction presumably for 6 years from the start of the project.
So the 114 represents, that's escalated to 217.
Yes, and then we looked at that. Our estimating team looked at it and believed it's a little bit less expensive. It's a $95 million project.
Okay, but then you're going to escalate it forward.
That includes escalation. The escalated to 2017, and the coming estimate is what we project that would cost to complete.
So the total would be, I'm confused.
Okay.
You're saying it's escalated to 114 if we did it in 2017, but it's going to be at the end, which is going to be 5 years down the line. So is it another $95 million in addition to the 114?
No. The current estimate, the 2017 estimate and the coming estimate includes escalation for completion. The 2014 was a baseline number that included escalation from 2014.
And with that, are we going to do all of this renovation below that?
No.
What are we renovating with the $95 million?
There was a specific amount of square feet. I don't know the number of that square footage. I'd have to refer to my notes to know that. But we have a identified amount of square footage that was renovated in that 2014 plan.
Okay. But then we're going to get through with all of this, and we're going to still have all these buildings here that we've got that are empty now, and we've got to decide whether we're going to do anything with them or tear them down.
Correct.
Is there any, I know we're talking about a new inpatient facility, new tower for the mental health, and I know everybody out there is going to probably start throwing rocks. But have we thought about the hospital tower and renovating that for the mental health?
We looked at that in our report. The issue we face with that tower is almost anything you do from a patient care standpoint is going to require a complete renovation. I mean, basically taking it down to the structure. The exterior windows will require replacement. The entire mechanical, electrical, plumbing system will require replacement. So it's a significant cost burden to be able to do that, and you're putting it into an inefficient footprint. So you're spending excess dollars that are going to have a hard time meeting those needs.
But it wouldn't have as high of a technological put back, or am I wrong about that? I mean, it's not going to require the operating equipment and all the other technology that would go into an operating, a patient room with all of the x-rays and everything else that's around it. I wouldn't think. I mean, I would think that on a mental health, that it would be primarily the room with certain floors that might have more technology involved than what the normal patient rooms would have.
That's correct, and we're not comparing the cost of an inpatient acute care room to a psych room. This is when I'm saying that their savings would be nominal, it's comparing the cost of a new psych hospital versus renovating it for psych. So it's a direct comparison.
So we're now, I don't want to even say it. Go ahead.
So, and you're right. And as we went through our analysis and looked at how much of that existing building or existing buildings are going to be renovated, simple math we were at about 280,000 square feet of vacant space that was unidentified. Now, the first two components there, Trinity Springs and the laundry and materials management building, we think that there are uses for. In talking with JPS, they're thinking they would use the Trinity Springs building to consolidate all their IT functions with minimal renovations needed to be able to do that. And the laundry and the materials management building are fairly specialized, so we would not recommend that be reused. That would probably be a demolition. So taking those two components out, you're left with about 180,000 square feet to figure out what to put in there. We looked at working with JPS. They have, I think, within a mile radius, there's upwards of 70,000 square feet of leased space that could potentially be moved into that building. There's other support offices and ancillary services that could go in there as well. And we did identify cost for demolition options if those buildings were to be demolished. For the Trinity Springs building, it's upwards of $3 million. The laundry materials management building, it's $2 million. And the existing tower and whatnot is $41 million. Now that's a big number because it includes a renovation allowance, because there are pockets of services that are going to be in those buildings that would need to be consolidated and relocated before demolition could occur. So that's.
So yours is giving us an estimate of the downtown facility.
Correct.
Yours told us where we need to put them, but didn't give us any estimates. And yours just told us how inadequate we were already.
We estimate that the clinics are about $22 million apiece.
A piece?
Yes.
And there are 4 of those?
Yes, and we used that, the driver we used was the cost of the Northeast Clinic that is being built now. So, this is the, are there any other questions? Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
That's a whole lot of square footage that
Whole lot of people.
we'll have to deal with.
Vacant square
It's a vacant
footage?
square footage.
Yeah, I mean, I
You know,
understand.
if it's, I don't know what it's worth, but
Well, I mean, it's, all of those buildings are probably, at a minimum 40 years old. And I do understand the fact that we've got all old plumbing, all the technology's all old. You would basically, as they've said, probably have to scrape back and hope that the bricks are still attached to something. Because you'd have to go all the way to the bricks.
wonder how many phases over the 40 years were built to create that building.
A lot.
The 180,000 foot.
Well, the 180,000 foot building was probably all built at one time.
Think so?
Yeah.
Might not have been.
You know?
Are we talking about the tower?
Yes.
8,000, yeah, I believe that was built in 71, the 11th story tower.
Okay. It was all done at one time? And hadn't been added to?
No, the patient tower has not been added.
Okay.
The tower itself, but it is joined with other pieces.
Well, that's what I mean.
I mean, we've shoeholed a bunch of stuff in there, Trinity Springs, but the 11-story tower, that was all built at once. We didn't add anything on the top of that. I mean, I guess we thought before about can we build a building and add to the top of it, but we ain't never done it.
What we tried to do today is to show you the material that the Blue Ribbon Committee has looked at, and they've looked at it in depth, and they're in the process of developing their recommendations and compiling that into a final report. And once that report is complete and approved by the committee, they will make their final recommendations to the commissioners.
And the board of directors?
Yes, in fact, I think I spoke with Commissioner Johnson, maybe the judge, I might have mentioned to you also, maybe some of the other court members. What we'd like to do is whenever we get to the point that the Blue Ribbon Committee is ready to make their report, that we hold a joint meeting of the Board of Managers and the Commissioners Court to jointly receive that report.
Will that be here?
Probably so. Probably in the we might move it to the Family Law Center and the big meeting room over there. I think that would be a pretty good sized room to hold that meeting. Your Honor, that's all we have at this time.
Have you had a lot of public input and a lot of public participation?
We have
at those Blue Ribbon meetings.
We've had the public has been in the audience. We have had some comments from the public. Each one of those meetings has been posted, and people have been encouraged to go online to go ahead and view those. So what we've tried to do is, as we said at the very beginning, that we wanted to create a transparent process. I believe that we've done that.
Short of, I mean, if you're looking at the downtown part of it, I mean, I know that the clinic thing was something that they did not originally propose in the original numbers, and I hear you saying that's about $88 million if we do 4.
Right.
But I don't see a significant change from where they were to where we're going.
I think what you're seeing is that there's an increased number of beds that the Blue Ribbon Committee is considering compared to the 2014, especially in mental health and in some of the new tower. I don't know if the 2014 had the day surgery center involved in it. This does, which alleviates the utilization of the emergency room and gives it more flexibility and more availability for emergency patients. Yeah, operations. operating rooms. And so things like that, I do think that basis that, or the reports that we saw in 2014 served as a good basis and starting point, but it also included more than just what was in that 2014 study. And obviously it was something that was done in an open meeting setting, so you had people that wanted to have input could have input. I will tell you also, quite frankly, the makeup of the Blue Ribbon Committee, that is a very diverse group, and they brought different views and opinions to the meetings as related to the needs of not only JPS but also the entire county. And so you're getting a broad-based input from a cross-section of the community that I think is going to give you a real understanding of what the community is really looking for.
The takeaway for me is the significant difference. The significant difference between this plan and the 2014 plan is in the intangible. It's not in the tangible. The intangibles are the drivers of successful healthcare delivery, and the intangibles include the formation and implementation of an integrated delivery system with a concentrated effort on prevention, on ambulatory care prevention, and a cultivation of a culture of health in Tarrant County. All the buildings, the expansion, the renovation, those are tools. We have to look at those as tools. They are hammers, they are pliers, they are drills, okay? So those things have to be done in the context of the integrated delivery system with a concentrated effort on prevention and a cultivation of a culture of health in Tarrant County and wellness in Tarrant County. Otherwise, we are fighting a losing battle.
Well, most of what I see here is not a whole lot of different in the downtown facility, is not a whole lot of difference between what they had in 2014 and what they're talking about now, except that cost inflation has gone up 4 to 5% a year, and that's costing us an extra 100 to 120 million. Granted, they did not have the 22 or the 100 million in there for outside locations, and I agree that I think that was one of the main reasons we said to step back. But most of, if what I think I hear you saying is you've added more beds than what we were looking at in 2014. Some of those, depending upon whether we shell those floors out to get those extra beds or whether we wait. If we wait and don't add an 11th floor, renovate the 95 million at the end of the deal, and do everything else about the way that they were originally going to do it, we're at about 950, which is about 150 more than what we were at in 2014. And then the additional amount is the extra 88 million for the stuff outside, which was the clinic. So you're estimating this on all this inflation and escalation. You say you're doing it through 2017, but are you doing it through 2017, or are you saying we're not going to get to any of this before 2019?
No, it anticipates, the escalation starts in 2017. It anticipates the timeline that it's going to take to plan, design, and build those facilities, and we take escalation to the midpoint of construction of each of those different components. So those numbers that are the current cost numbers are anticipating escalation to complete the project.
Which, okay. All right. If there's nothing else.
The longer we delay, the longer, the more it's going to cost us.
All right. If there's nothing else at this point in time, we're adjourned.